Hi there, we're back again with The Wandering Road. This is Mickey Cope, your host. I told you before we were going to have Wells Reserve back. So today we are back live on camera. Here is Paul Dest.
Yeah.
See, that Best got me. Paul Dest, D-E-S-T. Jeremy Miller. And we've had this one before, Suzanne Kahn. And welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having us. Mickey.
Oh, you're so welcome. Seeing as how I don't know much about the reserve, I know it used to be a Ludholme farm.
Ludholme Farm. It still is. The Ludholme Farm, and I'll explain, is
Okay.
part of the reserve.
He is the reserve director.
That's correct.
So I'm going to turn it over to them because they've got slides for us, and there's a number of them, and I want to keep this rolling. So it's up to you, darling.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much, Mickey. Thanks for having us. We're really
You're
pleased.
You're
We're always anxious and most willing to speak about the Wells Reserve and the great things that we do there. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a review of
Okay.
what we are and where we're located and how we were founded.
Okay.
And it would be good if I can get the first slide up so that your viewers can see the wonderful site where we are located in the south coast of Maine. We are, as our slide indicates, we're the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve. That's a mouthful, I
Yeah.
realize that. But that's what we are. We are a place of conservation, we're a place of science, we're a place of education. We're 2,250 acres of wonderful land and historic buildings. Yes, we're a large protected area in the south coast of Maine, located in the town of Wells and adjacent Kennebunk and Ogunquit. Just a wonderful, beautiful facility that's open to the public. As I mentioned, we do science, education, and also conservation. Those are our three program areas. I would like to give you just a little bit of background. You mentioned Ludholme Farm. That plays very much into what we are and how we came to be. This place called Ludholme Farm, located in Wells in the late 1970s, was going to be put up for sale. It had been for over 300 years a working farm. And in the late 70s and early 80s, the family that owned Ludholme Farm were going to put it on the market for sale. The people in Wells and the adjacent communities of Kennebunkport, Ogunquit, Wells, York, Sanford, the whole southern Maine realized that this place is a gem. They have beautiful historic buildings, farm buildings that were in disrepair. There was absolutely wonderful open fields and forests. And at that point in time, in the late 70s and early 80s, it would have been, for some, a perfect place to put in a development, many hundreds of homes. At that point, the community members, led by a fellow by the name of Mort Mather, who lives in Wells, rallied a group of people to say, we have to protect this place. So Mort Mather and company, and there were folks from, like I said, all throughout southern Maine, even in adjacent New Hampshire and Massachusetts, formed an organization called Ludholme Trust. And that was formed in 1982 to protect the farm, but also concurrently, they discovered this program called the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, and they thought, wouldn't this make a wonderful place to base science and education and at the same time protect this wonderful acreage? So they formed in 1982, and I'll get into it in just a minute, and I'll try to be brief because it's rather complicated. They formed in 1982 to protect Ludholme Farm and to create Maine's first and still only National Estuarine Research Reserve.
Wow.
So they were successful. They partnered with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That's a federal agency that is best known for the National Weather Service.
Right.
They partnered with NOAA, as it's known, and with state agencies and federal agencies to protect this acreage and to create and designate Maine's first National Estuarine Research Reserve. And that happened in 1984. And then by 1986, we were operating. If you can go to the next slide. So essentially the mission of the reserve is we're dedicated to protecting and restoring coastal ecosystems of the Gulf of Maine through research, through education, through conservation, and working with communities, which is very important. Go to the next slide. So what we are is, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, we're not alone in this. This Wells
Yeah, it's just
Reserve, as
domestic.
we call it, at Laudholm, is our short name, Wells Reserve at Laudholm. We're not alone. There are 27 other national estuarine research reserves. They extend all the way from Alaska, which is 300,000 acre reserve, which is our biggest, all the way down to Puerto Rico, and into Florida, into Southern California, Texas, and our most recent one was designated and created on Lake Superior in Wisconsin. So we're all part of this national system of 28 places, again, all protected areas that use their protected land to educate people about science, about natural history, about their role in the natural environment, but also science. We do original research, and we convey the results of that research to the public. So we're in this with a bunch of others. We're very proud to be part of this system. We like to think the Wells Reserve is one of the crown jewels in the system, but I think we're very proud of what we do and very fully engaged in our mission.
Is that one up there, Humboldt Bay? At Humboldt College in that area?
Oh, yeah, you
They've
mean
done
it's-
a lot of stuff in that bay.
There could be, you're talking about in Down East Maine, or?
Or in Oregon?
Oh,
Are you
no,
there?
over in California.
Okay, that's the
can see
Elkhorn
that.
Slough is in California. We also have San Francisco Bay. So Elkhorn Slough is in Monterey Bay. Then there's San
Oh, okay.
Francisco Bay Reserve, and then we have one down in
Because I
the
know
Tijuana.
Humboldt does a lot of,
Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of environmental.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So the next slide. This is, so as I mentioned, we're 2,250 acres.
Wow.
And what you're looking at here is Laudholm Beach is on the closer to us side, and just to the north there is Crescent
beautiful.
Surf Beach, and that's the little river with the salt marshes, and where those trees are. That's called a coastal dune system.
really?
Yeah. So we have really one of southern Maine, York County's only remaining wild beaches. We have dunes, we have salt marsh, freshwater systems, we have freshwater wetlands, salt marshes, upland fields and forests. It's a delightful place that offers a home to a diversity of wildlife. And if we can go to the next slide. So it's really quite a spectacular place.
Yeah, it's
but we're not
beautiful.
just a place for wildlife, we're a place for people. And so we have 7 miles of trails that wend their way through these various habitats so people can observe wildlife, they can look at the habitats, they can learn about the various habitats and wildlife that we have, as well as some of the research that we do too. So we're very much a public place. Again, a place for knowledge and a place to come learn and appreciate nature. And let's see, the next one. So this is what makes our reserve perhaps different than the other 27 in the system, is that, I mentioned earlier where Laudholm Farm is part of the reserve. When the reserve was protected, with the acreage came historic buildings. Some buildings, such as the barn that you see, were 100 years old. Some are 200 years old. So when the place was protected and this reserve was created, then we went about the rather involved process of restoring these buildings to serve not farming use, which is their past, but our 21st century use, which is science and education. So that barn you're looking at back in 1982 and 1984 was in very poor shape, as well as some of the other buildings. But again,
What does that barn hold now?
That barn holds our auditorium, a 80-seat auditorium, a place that used to be for cows, for milking cows, has now been totally restored and repurposed for a place for education and public events. We also have a library in the building, and then we have our maintenance shop, and then the big part of the barn that you see is we have a lot of public events in there. So, again, a place that once had horses and cows now has people, now has students, now has adults. It really is quite a treat to see a place that has been totally converted to new use. And
Solar.
this right here that's one of our initiatives. We're an historic building that has repurposed these buildings to suit our science-based mission. We are moving ahead with some initiatives in energy conservation, renewable energy. This past year, we installed 2 solar systems, solar arrays that are now taking care of about 50 to 60% of our electrical energy needs.
Oh, cool.
Our goal is to get to 100%.
Yeah.
We're hoping to do that within the next 2 or 3 years. So that's very much a part. I mentioned our conservation mission. It's just not conserving land, but it's also conserving natural resources as we go about
Helping the
our
planet.
business. Absolutely, that's very important. And let's see, I think there may be one other slide. So on this 2,250 acres, which I have to mention, one of our partners in managing this acreage is Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. They
Okay.
own quite a bit of the land that's within the reserve. But
Okay.
we have a stewardship responsibility to protect endangered species, and you're looking at piping plovers. That's a shorebird.
I've had a
Very-
number of shows on that.
Yes, yeah, and then you're looking at the New England cottontail. These are two species.
We were talking about that just a few minutes ago, that Paula and I, that she hasn't seen any rabbits around.
Well, they are the native ones, the ones that live in the wild, are rare. You don't find many of them around at all. I think that's it. Their population is declining and declining rapidly. So that's one of the species that we have at the reserve that we are trying to keep their
I
populations
mean, rabbits
growing.
are supposed to multiply
Well,
like
they are,
crazy.
aren't they?
Come
Yes,
on.
but therein is the myth, or at least certainly with our New England cottontail, which is our one native rabbit. But we have raptors, we have songbirds, many different wildlife species in the reserve that we have a responsibility to protect, and in some instances restore if their populations get to a very, very low level.
Cool.
So with that, we'll turn it over to Suzanne to talk about the education programs that we have at the reserve.
Now, I wanted to ask,
Yes.
now how did you become the director? How did you wind up? Are
Very-
you from here? From Maine?
Actually, I'm from, I live in Kennebunk. I live in the area. I've been involved in environmental conservation for quite a number of years. Just so happens that before I became in my position here, I was a volunteer with the reserve.
Oh,
I was
okay.
working first with the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and then I was working with the Maine Coastal Program in Augusta. But I was a volunteer at the reserve and chaired a couple of committees
Cool.
and led programs, and wouldn't you know it, the position came available and I applied, and son of a gun, they hired
got
me.
you.
Yes,
Okay.
and I've been there for 13
They've hooked
years
you.
now. Yes, absolutely.
Hook, line, sinker.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And I never asked you the last time, how did you wind up here at the reserve?
I came from the Children's Museum of Maine in Portland. I was the science coordinator there for 7 years.
Cool.
And before that, I was a ranger at Acadia National Park.
Oh, wow.
And so I was looking for an opportunity that would get me back outside, more of a direct connection to the outdoors again.
Cool.
After being in the museum for a while. So about 5 years ago, I started my position at the reserve.
Okay, now you can go ahead with yours. I'll get you later.
Yeah, so this slide shows a couple of pictures of people. The one on the left is our staff at the reserve. We have 2 full-time year-round staff members, myself and Kate Reichert, who's our education associate. And then the other 2 in this picture, they're our summer staff. We hire 2 staff members in the summertime to lead our camp program. And then we rely on lots of docents, lots of volunteers who lead educational programs for us throughout the year. And so you see in that picture they're taking a boat trip as part of their training. Every season there's training for several days for our docents to keep their skills sharp and make sure their questions are answered and that they're up to date on our programs.
Cool. For that many acres, I can see that, yeah. That you'd have a lot of them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so some of the programs we offer are for schools, and we have 3 field trip options for various grade levels. We do programming for pre-K through grade, all ages, but this just shows us our guided school programs. So the first one for kindergarten through 2nd grade we do in partnership with the Center for Wildlife out of York, and they bring their animal ambassadors, non-releasable animals, to show the children, talk about their adaptations, And then we bring the students out onto our trails and we look at the habitats of those same animals.
Cool.
For grades 3 through 5, we have our long-standing Exploring Estuaries program. And for that one, we rely on 5 to 6 docent volunteers. We take the students on our trail system, and we take them out to the estuary where the river meets the sea, and they learn all about the wildlife, the watershed, their part in the watershed, the stewardship again,
Yeah.
that element we like to bring into all of our programs. So that's a really popular program that's been around a long time. And then Microscopic Marvels is for our middle and high school students. And for that program, we go to the marsh and we do water sampling. We test for salinity and the temperature and turbidity, really hands-on in our salt pools. And then we go back to our teaching lab where we look at plankton under our microscopes. So we collect the plankton in the marsh, and then we
Great education.
allow the students to identify them and get really up-close looks at the base of the food chain.
Very base.
So
But
those
they're
are-
having problems with the plankton too, I heard.
Well, Jeremy can.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's Jeremy's.
Yeah, well, we were just at a
Oliver.
conference, myself and a colleague in the research department, called the Regional Association for Research in the Gulf of Maine. It's a group of scientists everywhere from, anyone doing studies in the Gulf of Maine get together once a year and kind of discuss what's happening in the Gulf. And last year, NOAA actually recorded the highest ever surface ocean temperatures in recorded history. So that's a pretty big alarm for folks who are watching ocean processes. And of course, those ocean temperatures have a lot of effect on how that ocean water turns over, and as well as how plankton and fish and everything hatch out of their larval stage and get going. So yeah, they're seeing some pretty big changes from that, and scientists are trying to figure out if that was an anomaly or if that's going to be the new normal trend. So.
Okay, I'll be a good girl. Go ahead.
And our largest creatures on Earth eat
That's
the
right.
plankton. So
Plankton,
that's
yes.
going to have effects for lots of.
Especially they follow where the plankton blooms are, and they know where that is. It's
There's already been a marked decrease in right whales in
Yeah.
the Gulf of Maine this year, they're saying. So
Yeah.
it's likely connected.
Yeah.
Everything's connected. So we have our guided school programs. We also offer self-guided options and custom programs. So for those schools that want to come, but they just want to kind of do things on their own time, we offer consultations. We provide equipment if they want to borrow equipment like soil cores and binoculars and field guides, buckets for tide pooling, things like that. We provide for teachers and
Cool.
scout troops. So a whole variety. We recently played a climate change game with a high school that was visiting from New Hampshire. So they took on the role of town planners and emergency personnel.
Whoa.
And went through the process of trying to come up with decisions about how to deal with sea level rise. So that was a custom program that was designed by my colleagues in our coastal training program, which Paul will talk about in a little bit, but we were able to adapt that for use with students.
Oh, nice.
Very fun.
So you're doing basically some of the same stuff that Drew Dumch is doing up at the ecology school.
Yes, our
Bringing
colleagues at the
the
ecology
kids
school. Yeah,
back.
they're exactly right. We don't have the ecology school as an overnight.
Yes, he does, yeah.
Yeah, ours is for the most part day. Although we do have a dormitory which we do accommodate groups when they come here for a
Are these
while.
the only two schools, or I shouldn't say schools?
Yeah, I would say that we
Areas.
and the Ferry Beach Ecology School are the two main educational institutions
Okay.
that really focus on education. I mean, you have other conservation groups in York County that are, for the most part, conserving land. But we are two institutions that really focus on
Yeah.
interpretive education for K through 12 people. Our education program extends beyond that. We do a lot with adult learners as well.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say it's an accurate assessment, Mickey, that we're two of the education institutions here.
Well, I went up and toured Drew's and had him on the show, and I was I was so impressed. I wished I'd had that when I was a kid.
Oh yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it really
I
is a
mean,
great program. Yeah.
That I blew my mind.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great colleagues of ours.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
Saco.
That's good. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, baby.
That's all right. Yeah. So another program we offer, we have traveling trunks, which are education kits that are full of materials and lesson plans for teachers. So we have an elementary and middle and high school level tree trunk, all about trees and forestry. We have an estuaries trunk, which again is about where the rivers meet the sea, the estuaries, and a Feathered Friends trunk, which focuses on birds. And those are available
wonderful.
for 1, 2, or 3 week rentals. We've had both teachers and also scout troops
Oh,
borrow
cool.
those. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's another educational resource we provide. Next slide. Our Discovery backpacks and activity books. Our Discovery program is a trailside program. We have, in the picture there, you see 3 different colored backpacks hanging from our exhibit area. We also have corresponding activity books that visitors can purchase for $5 in our visitor center, and they're filled with activities that families, scout troops, school groups do along our trails. And they borrow a backpack that goes along with the book, which is again filled with fun educational materials.
Cool.
And then there's a picture there that shows the numbered posts with the mascots for each backpack and book. And so visitors are guided along the trails, and they stop at each numbered post along the way to do something with the book and the backpack.
Smart.
And our three books, Water Wonders, deals with the water cycle and watersheds. They go down to the beach, Lodholm Beach. Habitat Hike goes through our forest habitat, our field habitat, and out to the estuary. And Time Travels is focused more on the history of our site, both the farm history, Native American history, even back when the glaciers came through
Wow.
our site. And they go on a treasure hunt from historic building to historic building on campus as well.
Good deal.
So those are lots of fun. We do have 2 exhibit areas. The newer set of exhibits are in our visitor center, which is the old farmhouse on site. And they focus on changing landscapes. So there are 4 rooms, and you walk through the rooms going through time, looking at models that show the landscape over time. So how it changed from mostly forested to then field habitat, the farming, the colonization by Europeans, and then visitors are brought to the present day to learn about what we do now at the reserve and the habitats and wildlife that we protect. The Coastal Ecology Center, which they're about 10 years old now,
Yeah,
Paul.
I would say.
They're in our research building, and they focus more on the coastal ecology of the area, so more of the science. And there's actually a window where visitors can look into the research lab and see the scientists, looking at the plankton in their microscopes and analyzing water samples and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
those are open for visitors to the public. We offer teacher trainings. Here we are with a Teachers on the Estuary group. We take them out in kayaks to experience the estuary firsthand. We work with Jeremy so the teachers can learn about our system-wide monitoring program and ways they can integrate that with their students, learn about all across the country at all 28 reserves. There's a huge set of data, which Jeremy will talk about. So we expose teachers to that. We get them outside, actually at the marsh, using water quality equipment. The focus of our teacher trainings is to provide as many resources as we can this is a middle and high school training program, Teachers on the Estuary, but we do trainings for all ages, pre-K through 12th grade. Don't think we've done any college level trainings yet, although we'd certainly be open to
Yeah.
that. In the summertime, I mentioned we bring on 2 additional staff members to run our summer camp program. Those are day programs, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and they're
No
for
overnight camping, I take it.
Yeah, no overnight camp.
Oh, okay.
they're for elementary and middle school students, and we offer them in the summertime, and we also offer a few options during February and April school vacation weeks.
Cool.
So those are very popular. We're already thinking about what programs we're going to offer next summer. So stay tuned on that. There'll be a lot of options.
Well, I've noticed you got an awful lot of stuff going on in the paper.
Yes.
It's in your folder at home that I forgot to bring.
Yes. Year round, we have offerings
You've got a lot going on down there.
for the public. Exactly. Yes. One that's coming up, we do special events throughout the year, and we have Winter Wildlife
Who
Day,
that is?
February 20th, during school vacation week.
That's Edna.
Yes, Edna, the albino porcupine. So the
We've
picture.
had her here.
You
Oh,
have?
really?
Oh. Edna actually
Had her
passed
here.
away. She.
Oh, no.
She's.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, she's no longer with us,
Aw.
but she was a big hit for sure. You can see in the picture she's having a snack in our auditorium on site during Winter Wildlife Day. It's an event when we partner with the Center for Wildlife and York County Audubon Society, and it's a free event. We have Center for Wildlife does a presentation with their animal ambassadors, and we have tracking walks and wildlife projects for families to do together. We also have an Earth Day celebration in April. This year we're bringing Matt Lusigan, who's a children's Earth songs performer. He's going to be coming to the reserve to do a special concert for children and their parents, for families. And we'll have games and crafts, and we'll do a beach cleanup on Lod Home Beach to, again,
cool.
get that stewardship aspect. And Pumpkin Fiddle, National Estuaries Day celebration, that
That's
takes
the
place
one we
in
forgot
September.
to talk about last time.
Last time, yes.
Yeah.
So that's every year. It's on National Estuaries Day, and it's sort of Harvest Festival meets estuary exploration and learning.
Cool.
So that's a big one in the fall.
Like her headband.
Yeah, that's one of our Estuary Day crafts. Face painting. And of course, public programs. They're offered all year round. Picture on the left is a wildflower walk that we have every June. And on the right, little preschooler. We've been doing preschool story hour programs for the past couple years. And so yeah, all the way from preschool to adult. We have lectures, we have walks, we do kayaking on our little river for folks in the summertime. It's a wide variety. And some are free, some have a small fee attached. Hopefully something for everybody.
Well, now, are you a 501, or are you?
Yeah, well, we're a hybrid, I guess.
Hybrid?
We're a 501c3 and an independent state agency. We're different than other reserves. Yeah,
Okay.
we are a 501c3. We have a nonprofit called Lod Home Trust, which is very, very important.
That's
It's a
the best
501c3. They provide funding for us, and without contributions from members and donors, we would not operate at the level we do today. So yeah, very much 501c3, member-supported institution.
And
here.
then the other funding comes from?
The other funding comes from foundations. They'll come from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We get a grant from there as well.
Oh, good.
But all of these various funding sources, either from sometimes foundations or from NOAA or from the National Science Foundation or the Department of Interior, requires a non-federal match. So in other words, in order to get some federal funding, let's say like a science or a research grant or an education grant, you need to put up what's called non-federal match or non-federal private dollars or
Okay.
state dollars in some instances to be able to get that money. So private funding from the communities is very important for us to enable us to deliver the programs that Suzanne talks about and that Jeremy talks about, as well as to steward our land and to take care of those wonderful historic buildings.
Cool, cool.
One
Okay.
thing, Mickey, I forgot to mention for both of our school program offerings and our camps, we have scholarships available. And in some instances, they pay for the entire fee. So just want to make sure folks are aware of that, that there are those
Scholarships available.
scholarships out
Okay,
there. Yeah.
cool.
So this is one of our other major education program emphasis. It's called the Coastal Training Program. We realized about a decade or so ago that our excellent interpretive education programming that Suzanne leads wasn't reaching some key audiences. And those audiences are more of adult decision makers. They could be planning board members, boards of selectmen, regulators, agency personnel. We realized that we needed to provide science-based information to these community leaders or state leaders, volunteers, to give them the best available information, because they're the ones that are making decisions about our coastal resources, about our natural resources. So in 2002, we established the Coastal Training Program, and it's led by a woman named Dr. Chris Fort. Chris is with the University of New England. We have a very close working relationship with the University of New England, in particular the Environmental Studies Department. So Chris works both at the University of New England and with us, and she and her colleague Annie Cox deliver workshops and trainings and conferences, all aimed at pretty much adult decision makers, adults who pretty much are helping to direct how we utilize our natural resources.
Cool.
So that's a very important program component that we have.
Oh, it'd
at
have
the
to be
reserve.
with the water level.
Oh,
rise and
absolutely. Yeah, there are a
everything
whole
that's
range of
happening.
issues
Yeah, the
from
whole-
clean water
Yeah.
to wildlife habitats to our changing climate. There's just a whole host of issues that come into play when we manage and take care of our natural resources.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we live within the landscape. We all live within the landscape. We all value, particularly in Maine, I think, more so than some states, we value our natural resources. Very, very strong environmental natural resource ethic here. And this is one of the ways in which we can reach people who are in positions that will make decisions. And that could, in many instances, that's volunteers. That's just it with Maine. A lot of your people, your planning board members, your site plan review committees, your conservation commissions, your boards of selectmen, your counselors, a lot of them are volunteers. They're doing this because they believe in their community and they want their community managed in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my position as director of the reserve is to ensure programmatic equity. And so I would like to turn it over to Jeremy so we can get that research and monitoring component in.
Yeah, let's
Very,
get,
very important part
let's
of
get
what
Jeremy.
we do.
Yeah,
So
great.
how did you wind up here?
So I got a great story, I think, about how I came to the reserve. I first came to the reserve as an 8-year-old boy, walking the trails with my parents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, on my way up to see my family in Waldoboro and Rockland, the Mid-Coast area. So I originally come from Western Massachusetts, and I came to, my family's from Maine, so it's kind of like a second home to me, always has been. We've done a lot of traveling in between. So we stopped by one day on the way up to see our cousins up in Waldoboro, and I have very vivid memories of walking these trails and seeing these old farm buildings. So that was how I first came to the Wells Reserve. So then
Wow.
I decided to attend college at the University of New England. So I graduated from UNE here in Biddeford in 2003. Yeah. So I came up here for college and pretty much have never left. That was in 1999, and so
Cool.
I've been up here in Maine ever since. So how I got professionally involved with the reserve was I was running around UNE one day wondering about what I was going to do for an internship. Was a big part of your college, preparedness to
right.
get out in the real, working world. And I was lucky enough to be hooked up with Dr. Pam Morgan at UNE, who was having a meeting with a few colleagues of mine at the research department here at the reserve to do this program. So long story short, I became an intern at the reserve in 2003, was my first year, and I stayed on the following year as kind of part-time staff, and a position opened up with the system-wide monitoring program, which I'll talk about in a second, and I've been there ever since. So it's kind of a really neat story from from my
good for
perspective.
you.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a great connection, and
Yeah.
to be working at this wonderful place that I used to visit, and of course did my internship at and stuff. It's a real nice, nice connection. So.
Through the eyes of a child.
Yeah, really, yeah. So making the connection from the types
Yeah.
of education, the public aspect of the reserve, to now our research program. So as our name entails, we are a National Estuarine Research Reserve. So research is a very real part of what we do at the reserve. So if we can go ahead to the next slide here, our research is housed in what is called the Maine Coastal Ecology Center. If I could just grab the next slide up. So this is a newer building on campus, not one of the historical buildings. So the Maine Coastal Ecology Center also houses the Michelle Dion Research Lab, the newly named.
It may be a new building, but it looks like one of the
It
other
does,
ones.
and
yes,
that's
that's
in-
good.
That was
Yeah.
the intent
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
really needed a research building, a research lab.
Yeah.
And so when we went to design the lab, we wanted to make sure it was in keeping
Yeah.
with the architecture.
cupola.
Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
We just felt that context was important in developing the design, and they did a nice job.
Yeah.
Cool idea.
So in talking about research, I would be amiss not to mention Dr. Michelle Dion, who was our first research coordinator there and was there for 20 plus years, and really brought our research program from a trailer and a couple microscopes, and well, actually from one office to a trailer and a couple microscopes to the building you see here, and really grew our research program out through collaborations and seeking out funds and working with the trust to raise money, and really did wonders for our research department. She unfortunately passed away last year after a long battle with cancer, and we've now welcomed our new research coordinator, Kristen Wilson, who is a University of Maine graduate, so someone who's returning to the state of Maine after doing some time in the Virgin Islands, so kind of coming the wrong way. We were all joking with her, saying coming back to the tundra after being on the islands teaching. But just quickly, an overview of the research department and what we do there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the system-wide monitoring program. So again, we are a national system of 28 reserves, and at all 28 reserves, we have this monitoring program in place. And that basically tracks changes in water quality, weather, and nutrients, or abiotic
cool.
factors affecting the estuary and the wildlife that live there.
So
And-
you're not all just separate. You're all working together.
Yes, we have some commonalities. Every reserve has an interpretive education program. All reserves do research, all reserves do the coastal training program, and all reserves do research, do the
System-wide
system-wide
and,
monitoring
and
program.
everybody shares.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep, I'll get to that in
absolutely.
just a
we-
second with my data. Yeah, so our data is available to the public. This is the system-wide monitoring program is a good example of a program that relies heavily on that NOAA funding to operate, because it is a very kind of money-intensive. We're talking about scientific equipment and
Right.
a lot of that kind of stuff. So it takes a little bit of money to keep that data
Right,
coming
right.
in, and that's where our federal partners come in to play big with that.
Cool.
And then I'll touch a little bit on some of the actual research and science that we do there. Most of it involves fisheries and restoration work. So we'll get into that in a little bit as well. So things like habitat assessments. I do larval fish sampling at the harbor, and some really neat projects like that. So next. So our system-wide monitoring program, again, we're 28 estuaries around the country, and you can imagine the coast of Oregon or the coast of Southern California is quite different than the coast of Maine,
Right.
is different than the coast of Mississippi. So, but they're all estuaries. They're all serving the same basic function, and we're really interested in how these estuaries or salt marshes or mangroves or whatever the habitat type might be is reacting to things like changes in climate, changes in population and land use. So our mission with the system-wide monitoring program is to identify and track those both short-term and long-term changes in abiotic and biological systems in our estuaries. So that's really important, because sometimes the big changes we can see in things like sea level or climate changes take a very long time to really show themselves over long periods of time. So this long-term monitoring, this historical data set's really important for scientists to be able to look at climate data and see the change, the relatively small changes that are happening.
The starfish that are falling apart.
Yeah, so there's
Oh,
a
man.
little ocean acidification stuff happening. So we'll go to the next slide here. So the system-wide monitoring program basically focuses on three things: abiotic monitoring, which takes into account things like water quality, weather, nutrients, those non-living things that have very real impacts on the living things in the ecosystem. We also do biological monitoring, so we're looking at habitat change, how habitat is changing over time, and we have a very active GIS department in our research department as well, headed by Sue Bickford, who do a lot of mapping and a lot of stuff using aerial photography and satellite imagery. Since Google Earth has came about, there's a lot more people working with spatial data now to try to look at a landscape level of how habitats are changing on that landscape level. So we've incorporated that into our system-wide monitoring program as well as just biodiversity. We want want to know how the plants and fish and animals are reacting to these changes as well, if we can pick up any changes in those. So next slide. So our abiotic monitoring parameters, you can see on the left is the water quality, on the right is the weather parameters. Pretty, basic stuff that is, important to basic functioning of all life. Oxygen, the pH level, how acidic things are, salinity, temperature, certainly very important. So all the things on the left of our water quality program, those are monitored on a 15-minute basis. So every 15 minutes, that data is being collected at 4 stations throughout the harbor. And the same with our weather station, the parameters you see there on the right, temperature, wind speed, and direction, relative humidity, barometric pressure. The bottom one is kind of an interesting measure. It's called photosynthetic active radiation. That's not a measure of sunlight. That's a measure of the specific wavelengths of light that are available for photosynthesis, basically. So we're interested in, again, that primary production of plants and plankton and having that data as well. Next. So our deployment strategy with these data loggers that collect our water quality data, we basically try to have a reference site and an impacted site. So at the reserve and the marshes that we work in the Webb Hannet Estuary and the Little River Estuary. The Webb Hannet is a little bit more developed and has a little bit more anthropogenic impacts to it than the Little River, being surrounded by the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge and ourselves over at Laudholm. There's quite a bit of protected land around that Little River. So those act as kind of like our two test or samples to look at. How is water quality different from a heavily impacted estuary or moderately impacted estuary on a grand scale of things to a very low impacted estuary. And we also try to look across that salinity gradient of the estuary too. So as salt water is moving into the estuary, that fresh water has to go somewhere too. And often that is pushed back up into the estuary. And that's where you see your tidal changes happening farther out up in the estuary. So we deploy both at the mouth of these systems and at the head of what we call the head of tide, or basically how far the tide goes up into the wetlands. Okay. Next slide. So this is actually a site map showing our specific sampling sites both in the Webb Hannet and the Little River. So the Little River is a much smaller estuary, as you can see on the northern side of that map there. And that beautiful picture Paul showed during his talk, that's where our data is being collected there, out in that salt marsh. And the other loggers are in the Webb Hannet, which are down to the southern part of that picture, and those red dots indicate where they are. So that's the head of tide, and that's the inlet logger, or the one closest to the ocean. So again, seeing how water quality is affected both by incoming tides and ocean water coming in, but also at low tides, how that head of tide logger is being affected by all the runoff and everything that's coming from the upland, or our upland water quality input. And our weather station is also on there, up in that 3 cluster top. That's right on campus. Right there. So next slide. So just a quick couple shots of where we deploy our loggers in the Webb Hannet to kind of show the impact. So the Webb Hannet Harbor is a very active fishing harbor. It's actually being dredged right now to remove some of the sediment that is being brought in there. So of course we're very interested to see how our data is going to look while that dredging is going on. And the bottom picture is the site of our head of tide site. That's the Route 1 bridge that crosses in Wells, near the Wells-Ogunquit line, right around the Hannaford Shopping Plaza, if anyone's familiar with Wells. That bridge is there's a waterfall just above it, Webb Hannet Falls. So clearly the tide is not going to move up past that waterfall. That's kind of the head of tide for that site where we monitor. Yep, next slide. And this is our non-impacted site. So again, you see that nice area of the Little River, not a whole lot of development going on, no docks, no parking lots, no piers, no fishing boat, just a very kind of unimpacted, natural, pristine ecosystem. And like Paul said, one of the few, remaining like kind of natural beaches in Maine. Most of our beaches look very different than the picture you're looking at there. So next slide will show our deployment at the mouth of the Little River, and then the next slide will show our deployment up at the head of the tide of that system. And as you can see, again, from the pictures, very little going on in the uplands around these stations, and that's kind of our control site. Go ahead to the next slide. So how we collect these data is with these data loggers from a company called YSI. The big bulky end up top is where the computer is, the memory. The probes are at the bottom that you can see there. And again, we're looking at temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, specific conductance, salinity, and water level or depth as well. See if we can pick up changes in how the tides are affecting these parameters as well. So these are the equipment that go out in our marshes and collect data. So every 15 minutes, these things are out there firing up, collecting that data, turning off 15 minutes later. So we have quite a big data set, and we've been monitoring at some locations since 1995. So you imagine every 15 minutes since 1995, monitoring.
How much more acidity have we got?
Parameters. Yeah, so, pH and again, seeing small changes in pH and temperature over long periods of time 10 years is about the minimum you need to start looking at those types of changes, and even then, they're happening at a scale that's so fine that sometimes the accuracy of your equipment won't quite pick them up. However, what we can show is how those parameters like water temperature and pH, we can show those changes. They just don't stand up well statistically in scientific literature until your data set gets a little larger, which of course we're working at the reserve to keep this data going, and we're going to be coming up on our almost 20 years of collecting data at some of these sites, so we're really going to have a nice, and this data is used by a lot of people, which I believe my next slide will go into a little bit. The scientists who are looking at those things, Miki, pH, ocean acidification, temperature, they rely on long-term monitoring stations like this to have that data at their disposal to look at and throw into much bigger analysis that involve a lot of different sites along the coast. So next slide. Another part of our system-wide monitoring program is our nutrient collection. So we also look at nutrients in the water, things like nitrogen and phosphate and chlorophyll, which is the pigment produced by the phytoplankton that are blooming there, and an energy source for that kind of low bottom-lying food chain there. So we we do grab samples, which is on the left there. You can see a person dropping a bottle in the water, and that'll close and grab a sample of water. On the right is something called the ISCO. Kids like to call it R2-D2, kind of looks like the guy from Star Wars. We put this out once a month, and that collects a water sample for us every 2 hours and 15 minutes around the clock, unattended. So a hose goes down into the harbor, there's bottles in there, and there's a little arm that turns and actually fills each bottle with water every 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Wow.
What that allows us to do is something called diel sampling, which is sampling over an entire tidal cycle. So again, we're interested to see how nutrients are being affected by incoming tides, so there's naturally occurring nutrients out in the ocean. And there's also excess nutrients coming into our estuaries from the upland, from things like runoff, agriculture, fertilizers, things of that nature. So it's very interesting to see how those nutrient data can change on an outgoing tide versus an incoming tide.
Right.
So that's how we collect nutrients. The nutrients that we look at are orthophosphate, which is the common form of phosphate found in the environment, silicate, which is very important for shell forming, ammonium, nitrate, nitrite, which is combined nitrogen, chlorophyll A, and dissolved inorganic nitrogen. Next slide. Your viewers are getting a science class today. It can be some heavy stuff, but it's very, this is the research and the information that's needed to inform the public about, how their actions are impacting the water quality, because these are the things we need to look at to see those impacts to the water quality.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, with that comes meteorological monitoring. We have a weather station at our reserve that also collects 50-minute data. It is a National Weather Service station because we're funded by NOAA, so we have a National Weather Service ID. Our weather data is,
Cool.
ingested into all sorts of, weather stations.
You got
and
that
people ping
Doppler
that.
radar?
No, we don't have Doppler radar. No, and I always tell people I monitor the weather. I do not predict it. I'm not a meteorologist.
So
a lot
you're
of
not
it,
taking
that's
any, okay.
Yeah, that's the first question. Is there going to be a snowy winter? I don't know. So next slide, please. The weather parameters we look at, again, air temperature, relative humidity, pressure, wind speed and direction, that PAR, photosynthetic active radiation, and of course precipitation, which, that's another trend that we're seeing in our environmental data collection is, we all know about the major storms that are happening and a lot of precipitation falling on our uplands, and all that precipitation is going where? Right into our estuary. So whatever that runs over or collects on the way, the more we see that precipitation data going up, the more we're going to see impacts into our watersheds. Next slide. So what happens with all this data? Where does it go? Again, we have 4 or 5 stations collecting 15-minute data around the clock, right? Pretty much year-round. It's a lot of data to manage. So we have partners in South Carolina at the University of South Carolina called the Centralized Data Management Office. Cool. You have a connection?
No, I live down there.
All right. So the Baruch Marine Field Lab is where they're housed, and their mission is to oversee the management and documentation and publication of all of our NERS monitoring data. So they're basically the people who get it out online so people can use it and look at it. Cool. Our weather data from the reserve is online real time, so you can hop online. Well, near real time, it's about an hour behind because of satellite transmissions, but you can pretty much see what the weather's doing at the reserve before you come and visit. If you want to hop on the website, there's links to that. So they QC our data with the help of the people who collect it, obviously, and make sure that's out there in the web address down below if anyone wants a second to jot that down, and they can also get that off of our webpage at thewellsreserve.org.
Okay.
Next page. So just quickly showing you real-time data on the web. When you go to that web address, you'll be greeted with this screen, which shows you a map of the reserve system, where you can go onto that View Download Data tab. And once you click that map, next slide, will show you the actual reserve map system. And this is where you can select what reserve you want to look at their weather or water quality data. So you select any reserve in the system, and the next slide, I've gone ahead and selected our Wells weather station. So this is what you're greeted with once you look at our weather data. So in that box on the left there, you get our most recent weather recordings. Yep, there's little things there that say 24-hour charts. If you click those, you can see a graph of the last 24 hours worth of data. So you can see if the temperature's dropped, gone up, wind speed switched directions, or if it's windier. So really a really nice interactive way to look at this data. And these types of web pages are really important for folks who are out working in the marine environment, need to know how weather's changing quickly. So of course NOAA, National Weather Service, is really aimed at getting real-time data out to people so they know what's happening as it's happening.
Cool.
So, yeah, it's a really neat part of our data delivery system at the reserve, is that we're able to get this data online.
See, I didn't know you had all this stuff down there.
It's
It's fabulous.
The thing about the research department, it's very well appreciated in our circle, but it doesn't have a great public connection sometimes. All these programs and education, of course, that's drawing in the public, and the public really, they come to the site to see this kind of stuff. Some of this boring science stuff, wants to hear about water quality, right? But of course, it's very important. It's important to our overall mission of what we're doing.
Sure is.
It sometimes gets a little hidden in the grandiose of our site, but it's a very real thing, and we do a great job of showing people our research through like what Suzanne's programs, education programs, which draw on many of my colleagues to come in and talk to visiting teachers and students and everything. So it's a really nice partnership that way.
Oh yeah.
Next slide. So this data is then, actually used by folks, and some of the applications of our SWAMP data are for water quality analysis, like you were asking. Is pH going up? Is it going down? What's happening with temperature? Estuarine research. So people will come to the reserve. One of our missions of the research department is to support visiting researchers, people who want to use our property to do research. When they come in and find out that we have 15-minute environmental data from our systems going back to 1995, they're like, whoa, that's great, because that helps inform them about the research they're about to do. They may be looking at crabs, or they may be looking at fish, but again, they're interested in water temperature too, because that's going to affect what they're seeing with their with whatever species that they're studying. So it's really nice to have that data set for visiting researchers. And on a national level, this data is used for storm analysis. Everyone from the Coast Guard to the National Weather Service will use this data to help inform their strategies or their forecasts and things of that nature. So it's being used at the federal level. Go ahead, next slide. And we also do a little biological monitoring, so we're starting to look at emergent vegetation and changes in vegetation. So as sea level rises and there's more flooding of the marsh and more durations of flooding, that vegetation is actually going to start changing.
Right.
So we're trying to track that, basically back movement of that vegetation into the upland, if that is indeed what we start seeing. We're only about 5 years into this, and you only monitor every other year. So we still need to collect a little data on this stuff, but one of the good biological monitoring programs been running since 2009 is our larval fish monitoring program. If you hop to the next slide, these give some really nice pictures of what fish look like before they hit our dinner plate, basically, or on the end of our hook. So we go out at Wells Harbor, where one of our swamp stations is, right there at the Webb Hanna Harbor, and we put a net out using the tides as our flow.
Right.
Basically just use the incoming tide to sample. Next slide. So what are we seeing in these samples? Well, these are pictures of larval fish on the right that are taken on our microscopes. These critters here are as small as 2 millimeters, and some are as big as about 1 centimeter, but you can imagine these are really, really tiny things. What amazes me about this, and one of the education programs is called Microscopic Marvels. That's one of the things that got me into science. I got my first little microscope kit at home, and I would grab anything from anywhere and stick it on a slide and look at it. Because when you get down to that level of detail, when something you see with the naked eye that's 2-3 millimeters looks like nothing, and then all of a sudden you pull it up to this level and you see the amazing detail and complex nature of these organisms, it's pretty wild. So anyways, our samples are returned to the lab. We pick them. We pick the larval fish out of everything else that's in that net, kind of ID them, and we're basically getting an idea of what other species of fish are using our estuary besides the ones that live there. So we've found cod and pollock larvae in our estuary, which is surprising to some people, because they think of that as offshore kind of seafood, not up in our estuaries, but our estuaries are very important for early fish development, including offshore species that depend on estuaries to actually rear their larvae and have them grow up. It provides protection. It provides a food source for them. So people need to understand that connection between our offshore resources like ground fish and our nearshore resources like estuaries, and how tightly they actually are connected. So again, some of our research helps to kind of shed a light on that stuff. Next slide. Just a quick graph showing the species composition. So again, we see herring, migratory fish in the estuary. We see the big one is cunner. That's a resident species that lives in the estuary. So we're kind of, obviously seeing a lot of those. There's rock gunnel. There's four-beard rockling. There's all sorts of species that make up what we see in our catch. And to this date, I believe we have 28 species that we found using the estuary at the larval stage. So it's
Wow.
a pretty interesting project. And if you go to the next slide, we were able to actually present at this at the Regional Association for Research of the Gulf of Maine. So that's another part of the research program. We don't just want to do this science. We want to get our science
Get it
into
out
the
there.
literature,
Yeah.
and we want to, publish papers, be in the scientific literature, and be a very real resource for other scientists and other agencies doing this kind of work.
Good deal.
So the other part of collecting this research is actually looking at the data, writing it up, and making some products from it.
Yeah.
Next slide. So we also do a lot of restoration projects at the reserve, and a few of our more, recent ones was at Shorey's Brook, a dam removal in Shorey's Brook. It's believed to be one of the oldest dams in York County. This dam was removed to bring fish passage back to that area and hopefully get smelt and certain species using that river again up beyond that dam, which was blocking the head of tide.
That's down in, it's a tributary to Salmon Falls River,
Right.
which separates Maine from New Hampshire.
Yep. And the other project is in Branch Brook, right in our backyard there in Wells Kennebunk Line, where we've actually rehabilitated a broken down fish ladder there that was
you
not
took down?
functioning. So we actually replaced that with a new fish ladder
ladder?
just
Oh,
recently.
okay.
Yep,
That
just
opened,
completed
and
last week.
took a ride with my colleague who's heavily involved with this, who is a veteran of your show, Jake Amon at the reserve, who also runs
Jake
the...
did that one?
Jake did that
was
one.
the project
Yeah,
leader.
so Jake
Oh, my
wears
gosh.
many hats. He was probably too modest to talk about all his great restoration and fish work he did when he was here for the beach profiling
Oh.
program. He also, works with us in our research department doing a lot of our fisheries and restoration work.
Better get that boy back on here.
Get him back up.
We could talk about these two
Yeah, you
restoration
could
projects for a whole
and
program.
some of these
so.
things
Okay.
I'm going to touch on really briefly because I'm not directly involved with them, but of course I have helped
Yeah.
out in the field and I have a general understanding. Next slide. So the Shorey's Brook, again, we just a glimpse of some of the partners that we work with at the reserve on some of these projects, everywhere from the Maine Department of Transportation to Great Works, Small Land Trust in the area, NOAA Restoration Centers, Maine Rivers Association, the Department of Marine Resources. They're all people who come together to help make these projects. They all have their little piece of the puzzle to make these things work. Next slide. So the next slide is our target species that we're looking at there, the brook trout, American eel, and rainbow smelt.
Yep.
Of course, we did fisheries assessment, habitat assessment in this area, and also egg surveys to see what was there before we removed the dam, and what we call as pre-restoration and post-restoration work. So of course, after you restore something,
Yeah.
you want to go back and figure out if your restoration actually
Ever-
is providing
worked.
any fruit. Right. So what we're going to be doing this spring is going out and counting eggs again and seeing if we see increases in smelt eggs in that area, and also doing our fisheries assessment again to see if we're seeing new species starting to utilize that section of the river that they never had access to before
Wow.
because of that dam. So pretty cool stuff in making the connection from pre to post restoration. Next slide. The successes were, we removed that tidal restriction, and there's a remnant smelt population that may still utilize that, and that's emerging data that's coming out of this now. And hopefully we'll be able to connect some of that upstream habitat with what's downstream now and remain that connectivity. Next slide. And just briefly, I'll move through these. I was really slide heavy here, but Branch Brook is the fish ladder that we're doing, and the same kind of thing. You can see our collaborators and partners there that make this work. Wells, Kennebunk Port Water District, and the Maine Coastal Program, Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge, all sorts of partners that come together to make these projects, as successful as they are. Next slide. And we had some different target species for this project. The next slide will show brook trout, American eel, a white sucker, a blueback herring, and a sea lamprey. And something really interesting that came out of some of these restoration projects was we captured what was called the American lamprey, or American lamprey, correct?
American brook lamprey.
American brook lamprey, which was actually never sampled in Maine before, and we were one of the first finders of this species in our rivers. And it may be doomed because no one was looking, because
I thought the lampreys
this
bred
is
down in the Sargasso Sea.
that is the sea lamprey.
This
That's
is
a
the
sea one?
American brook lamprey.
This
It's
is
a different
American brook
species.
American.
Yeah,
Yep,
American brook
brook
lamprey, and
lamprey.
this is the first documented occurrence in the state of Maine.
Wow.
We discovered through the Shorey's Brook restoration project.
Oh, that's
So,
cool.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool discovery of weighing
Yeah.
these fish going, wait a second, this guy looks a little different than our other lampreys. And we sent off photos and did our research, and sure enough, the state of Maine came back and said, that's a brook lamprey, and we didn't know we had those. So that was a pretty cool
Wow.
thing to find through this research for sure. Next slide. So again, we're hoping that to restore the habitat connectivity with these partners and monitor that fish ladder for its performance and to see if the fish are actually returning there and going. And one more slide I want to touch on here is our multidisciplinary kind of ecosystem service studies that we do. We're working with the University of New England on a Saco River fishery assessment, and basically assessment of the whole Saco River. It's funded by EPSCoR and the National Science Foundation. And there was actually a special ran on Maine PBN on this, on Sustainable Maine, a show. And if you ever see reruns of Sustainable Maine, you might be able to catch it. But this project involves a lot of collaboration between UNE staff and our own research department, looking at both the economic benefits of the Saco River, how people use it, as well as what's there for the biology and the fish and everything, and how adjacent land use and development in that area is going to impact or affect that system. And another similar one is in our Maryland Branch Brook Little River system right there in Wells again. We're working with folks from Clark University to look at the economic values of buffers, or leaving vegetated areas of vegetated land in between your properties in the rivers, and basically trying to sample both buffered and unbuffered sites to show differences in water quality and biology, hopefully to make the argument that there's not only a biological benefit but also an economical benefit as far as usage for fishing, view sheds, all that kind of stuff that bring people into the state of Maine. Again, our natural resources are a big draw to the state, and people want to see nice ecosystems when they're out there, not manicured lawns right down to the river. So that's a
have
program
fertilizer
that we're
in
looking
them.
at that. Yeah. So next slide. So I can't talk about research without plugging our volunteer monitoring a little bit, and this is where everyone in your audience has a chance to get involved with some of this stuff. So we do have a couple programs that we actively seek community members to help us out with. We have a lot of sampling to do. The Marine Invader Monitoring and Information Collaborative, or much easily called MIMIC, is something I run, looking at marine invasive species in the state. We have 6 sites from York to South Portland, and we monitor those in the summer. A couple of those sites are done by school groups, and a couple of them are done by myself and volunteers. So anybody who's interested in volunteering for any of these, we have a site right here in Biddeford Pool that we come up to once a month in the summer. So if anyone's interested in getting out and getting in the intertidal and learning about invasive species, they can contact me. We have a volunteer river monitoring program that Jake Amon runs, looking at water quality in those rivers that he's doing his fisheries research on. And of course, we also have the volunteer beach profile monitoring program that you guys heard about the last time Jake was in. So that was a really jam-packed, full, kind of fast overview of our research program.
Just about our hour is up here.
We achieved equity, right?
We did achieve equity, yes. I hope I didn't take the last.
Now you got the last word.
Yeah. Well, Mickey, thank you very much for having us. Delightful. We always like to talk.
We probably should do this another time and kind of break this down a little bit
We could
more.
talk on each subject: the conservation, the
Yeah.
science and
There is
monitoring,
so
and
much.
the education as well. But we're very proud of what we do. We are a place about people. We're a place of science. We're a place of education.
Yeah.
Knowledge is at the base of what we do, and we do it all. This
good
science and
stuff
education
coming out of
at
you
really a
guys.
spectacular place,
Yeah.
a protected place that's very special to the people of York County and the rest of Maine. So we'd be happy to come back and speak even in more detail about some of the projects.
Yeah,
we
that
mentioned
would
here.
be better.
Yes.
Yeah, let's plan on that for next
Okay.
year.
Yeah. Ron,
Let's-
just let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, our time is really out. My hour's up, and I can probably hear them, but I'm not looking. But in my head, I'm hearing those guys in the box in there. So I'm going to say goodbye right now, and we're going to have them come back on, because this is really good stuff that they're doing. I'm in this field, so I know what I'm talking about. They know what they're doing. And if you want to get out there and do some monitoring with these folks, please do it. Volunteer, get out there and move your butt. I love you all. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I'll see you in January. Love and kisses. Mwah. Great.